The Money Show.
Business Books.
Poplak, Richard Poplak. It's like a James Bond, really. He's a senior correspondent at Daily Maverick. Before we talk about the book of this week, how did the Daily Maverick Earth edition that everybody's raving about your skills as a mediator go, Mr. Poplak?
Well, no thanks to me, but definitely thanks to the team. Bruce, it was an unbelievable event. First of all, thanks for asking about it. Second of all, hi to you and your listeners. But I want to say something about that gathering. When we started our Burning Planet, the kind of specialized environmental section of the Daily Maverick, there was almost no uptake. Now, 4 years later, we had 1,800 people in the audience, 5,000 people registered online. Bruce, it was just a staggering event. Really, really meaningful, and it does feel like the discourse in this country is going to change in the right direction.
Was there a sense that we can reverse climate change? That we can, if not slow it, reverse it ultimately? Because the sense is now, let's try and limit the damage rather than actually let's try and win the war.
Well, the interesting thing was there was not a lot of talk about mitigation. There was not a lot of we can turn this thing around. But there was a lot of talk about how climate change, corruption, the collusion between corporates and governments have made things much, much worse and very, very dangerous on the planet. And the discussions about that were how we stop that. In terms of how we turn back the clock to pre-industrial times before we started burning fossil fuels, that was never mentioned. There are very real changes that are going to happen on this planet, and we're going to have to figure out how to mitigate them. But, what was great about this thing is that there was no frou-frou stuff. It really was just kind of nuts and bolts discussions about how to stop the corruption that ends up in climate change, what we can do about it, where our agency lies, and how to take control of our lives as individual consumers, which I think is what most of us are actually looking to do.
No, but precisely. We sit and blame and we point fingers and we say it's government and it's big business and everything else, but we don't amend our own behaviors. We don't change the way we act. We don't change the way we behave because somebody else must do it. And until we take individual ownership of the problem, I'm not too sure that we can make any real progress.
No, it's time for us to adult, Ruth. We've been children on this planet for a solid, 50,000 years. Now we actually have to grasp control of things and start behaving like smart adults. And that does start with consumption. No one wants to hear that. There's nothing harder than changing habits. We all know that. But it's going to happen, or our children and their children are not going to have a rock to live on. Our good old, as I called him, the most brilliant South African to ever live. It's not Nelson Mandela, Bruce. You know that. It's Elon Musk. He can only take a few of us to Mars. So,
and not yet either. Yeah, no, exactly. Not yet either. Not necessarily in our lifetimes. But
he can't get those big phallic symbols up into space yet. So we'll see how it goes.
I don't know if you're being sarcastic about the greatest human being ever born in South Africa, Elon Musk, but certainly he is a revolutionary in terms of his thinking on sustainability, whether you like him or not. You don't have to like his politics. You don't have to like his philosophy.
You're 100% right. On that, you're correct. Yeah.
He has driven so many changes in the sustainability discussion.
He has. And that's the interesting thing about Tesla. You have this technology which was discarded by most governments and most car manufacturers as unworkable. And he mainstreamed it. And for that, I will be grateful. Although, I had a gentleman on my panel that said that EVs aren't the solution. Electronic vehicles aren't the solution to climate sustainability. And to an extent, he's right. In order to survive, we are going to have to revision our cities. And it can't be that we all have a very, very fancy Tesla. That isn't the answer. But,
no, you're still gonna mine
with the battery stuff and
sorry, you've still got to mine the minerals.
Exactly, Bruce. Yeah,
you've got to get this. You got to get the stuff to market. You've got to generate the energy to provide to build the batteries to put into the cars that need to be manufactured. That still need to be, again, we go through. And then just one last thing on this. You used a term that I've never seen before, but I'm still, every time I think of it, I chortle. And every time I retweeted it, and I have had people chortling on my Twitter feed all weekend. You described, I don't know what it was, but something has been the dumbest thing since the invention of breakdance pants. I don't know why I found it funny.
Yeah. Well, I mean, you probably had a pair of breakdance plans, Bruce. Well, at least I hope you did.
One thing I'm absolutely certain of, I've never breakdanced because I would break. And the second thing, I never had the pants, even as a fashion statement, because I grew up in the Free State during breakdancing, and I would have been killed.
Yeah, rightly so. Yeah. But no, it was in reference to the car power ships. Which right. I think we can all agree literally are the dumbest idea since breakdance pants. So I think, there wasn't much dissent on that tweet.
Let's talk about a book called Crack Up Capitalism by Quinn Slobodian. A growing number of people around the world are increasingly disenchanted, and with just cause, with the idea that capitalism can serve them and their children's needs into the future. Capitalism skewed for the benefit of the few at the expense of the many. A quote from Mariana Mazzucato, who's a very smart economist who goes to the World Economic Forum, and she said, working people are increasingly frustrated at capitalism, and they just she used a different terminology and stuff, but it's just like Labour's share of global capital is at its smallest point ever, and that's really, and she used a rude word, upsetting people. So it's no wonder that people are getting fed up with capitalism. And they're also beginning to associate capitalism and democracy in the same bag and saying, well, democracy doesn't work because it's not working for me. And there are enough people in the world, perhaps now, who are saying similar things to actually bring about a change at some point in the way in which we think about how we choose people to run our countries and how we finance that and how we benefit from that.
Absolutely. And what Crack Up Capitalism illustrates, its subtitle is Market Radicals and the Dream of a World Without Democracy, is to basically reverse engineer your previous sentence. Well, it's not that democracy isn't working for people. It's that democracy has been designed by a lot of policymakers over the last 40 years to exclude the democratic process. In other words, there's been this mechanism, loosely called neoliberalism, to decouple capitalism and democracy. And that has had some very, very profound effects. And what Crack Up Capitalism looks at is these special economic zones, or their like, that have popped up all over the world. So to use perhaps the two most prominent examples, Hong Kong would be one. And we can see now how catastrophically that has led to a decoupling with democracy. And the other is the City of London, which, for all intents and purposes, is a completely unlivable cesspit, inhabited only by super rich Russian oligarchs, Saudi Arabians, and a few rich Britons. So there are these zones all over the world that have popped up in the last 50, 60 years that are specifically designed to exclude the democratic process, to literally build walls around these city-states or zones, however you want to describe them, and keep democratic engagement out. Tax havens, places where capital can run amok without the kind of regulations that the rest of us are subject to. That is the subject of this book. It's extremely profound, and you'll be thrilled to hear, Bruce, that South Africa plays quite a large role in Quinn Slobodian's narrative of Crack Up Capitalism.
In what context? I mean, without giving it all away, but how do we feature so prominently?
Well, I think what makes this a must-read book for South Africans is that Slobodian looks at the Bantustan system, which were this weird mixture of libertarian wet dream and state-run, police state-funded power grabs, state power grabs of land. So there were real initiatives, some of them by Leon Lowe of the Free Market Foundation, to build up and sell the project of the Bantustan as the future, as sort of versions of racially exclusive, democratically exclusive cantons, like in the Swiss system. So you'd almost run these weird little Bantustans in perhaps a post-apartheid era South Africa, like a corporation. And there is one vestige of this type of thinking, and that is the Republic of Urania,
Yes.
which keeps a lot of that thinking intact. So he draws a very, very compelling historical line between the type of libertarian thinking that we now associate with, tech bros like Elon Musk or whomever, but he situates it in the South African context using the Bantustans as an actual experiment that was promoted by, I guess you could say the grand architect of modern capitalism, Milton Friedman, but also guys who promoted that exact philosophy here, like Leon Lowe, who, by the way, was funded to some extent by the Koch brothers, or Charles Koch, at any rate, who's one of the grand wizards of American libertarianism. So there are all these really, really interesting links.
If we bring it to more recent times, Liz Truss and her grand plan for Britain, which broke the pound, pushed up mortgage rates, and with which Britain is still dealing, despite the fact that she was there for barely 6 weeks. And Kwasi Kwarteng, of course, she went on a big libertarian pluck that when she was running for election for leadership of the political party, her party liked very much. But in its practical implementation, markets had a hernia. It's not dissimilar from that respect, is it?
No, it's not. But she said the quiet part out loud. The city of London remains perhaps the most perfect example of one of these zones, these radical market experiments that were created without democracy. You look at Canary Wharf, which is effectively a private section of the city in which the laws were created by the owners of Canary Wharf, property developers. These type of things have spread all over the world. The model for that was Hong Kong. The model for that was Singapore. And we have a lot of fetishization of these kind of properties here in South Africa. There's a certain DA leader who has spoken very lovingly about Singapore as a model for what South Africa could become. Those ideas are old. They date back 3-4 decades, and they take their root in the Bantustan system.
Interesting one. Thank you, Richard Poplak. Richard Poplak is a senior correspondent at Daily Maverick. The book is called Crack Up Capitalism. Said fast, you can do all kinds of damage to yourself. Crack Up Capitalism by Quinn Slobodian. And it's a book reviewed for us this week by Richard Poplak at Daily Maverick.